Hi, everybody. Welcome to our September edition of The Good Book Club. We are so excited to see so many people here. We're really excited about the book that we're reading. If my background looks a little weird, it's because I am out of town. I'm not sitting on my regular couch with my regular books. And somebody pointed out it almost has like a little diaphanous temple effect. So I hope nobody is too triggered. We'll do the best we can. So our next slide is our mission statement. For those of you that are newer, we always start by reading our mission statement. And Tom, I'm wondering, we always call on somebody to do this or ask them ahead of time. Would you be willing to read our mission statement today as we get started? And I don't think he's here. Could I ask Bruce, would you read our mission statement today?
Yeah, let's see. I'm on my phone, but I have my glasses.
That we all need our reading glasses.
The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and share experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct our previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, thank you. That was perfect, Bruce. I appreciate that. I love our mission statement. It's so good. So we have some upcoming events that we want to talk about very quickly before we get, oh, you know what? Sorry about that, Melinda. I forgot we had one slide back from that. Apologize. I wanted to remind, just kind of mention that today is September 11th, and it is the 165th anniversary of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And our book club last year actually took a field trip. Here's a little picture of us to the site, and we zoomed book club from the location. It was just, I still think about that all the time. It was just absolutely amazing. If you have not had a chance to read the book that we read a year ago, it was called Blood of the Prophets by Will Bagley, and I would highly suggest that you do read that if you get a chance. It was a very powerful book and really described that event in detail and gave us a better understanding of it. So, and a shout out to everybody that went with us last year. That was really fun. I still think about that all the time. So thanks for going back, Melinda. Now forward. We do have some upcoming events we want to remind you guys about. Our first one is our next book club, which is going to be Early Mormonism in the Magical Worldview. And there's a date change on that. We are going to be having closer to Halloween, which is going to be on Sunday, October 23rd at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And we're going to talk more about this at the end after our discussion today. But just kind of back in your mind, book club's going to be a little bit of a different time next month. We also have, for our Utah members, we have a really cool event that we kind of stumbled upon. Darren Perry is a chief of the Shoshone tribe, and he is going to be doing a walkabout, kind of walking through the area where Shoshone campsites are and talking and telling stories. This is going to be on September 15th. Next week, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. out in the Ogden area. So I have some information about that on the Facebook page. We're also going to put all of these upcoming events in the chat if you just want to copy that. But this would be for people that are here in Utah. I think about 4 or 5 of us for sure are going to go. So it would be fun to get together and walk around as a book club if you'd like to come. So I'm looking forward to that. Our Lazy Learner series of discussions, we have these typically on Tuesday nights. It's not associated with the book. It's just we have interesting guests come on and talk to us. We have one that we're really excited about on the 27th. Is it the 27th? Yes, on the 27th. And this is going to be Liz Phillips. She is the granddaughter of Rulon Allred, who is the prophet of the Apostolic United Brethren. And if you're familiar at all with that history, he was murdered by the LeBarons. So she is a former member of the UAB. She is also a former member of the LDS Church. It's a wild story, and she's going to come on and talk to us, and she has a lot of slides. It's going to be really interesting. So put that on your calendar for Tuesday, September 27th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So another lazy learner coming up. We're moving now into October. We're going to be talking to Matt and Trish Harward. They have a very interesting story. He was a sitting bishop when his wife left, and he made the decision to then recuse himself from being a bishop and leave with her. They have a fascinating story, and sort of, well, I called it an adventure in alternative healing. So you can maybe think about what that might mean, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But they're a fascinating couple that we're going to talk to, and that's the Tuesday the 11th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then again, wonderful Darren Perry. We are so excited that we finally were able to arrange with him to come talk to us. He's the same one that's doing the walkabout earlier in September. But in November, on the 1st, on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, he is going to be Zooming with us to discuss his book, The Bear River Massacre, Shoshone History. If anybody wants to grab the book and read it prior to that, it's a short book, a quick read. You do not have to. He's going to tell us all about lessons learned from the Bear River Massacre. And several of us have heard him speak before. It's pretty amazing. So you definitely want to put that on your calendar. So I think we've made it through all the announcements. Not quite. We have one more. Here we go. Okay. So Book of Mormon the musical is coming to LA, close, to a lot of us in proximity. So we have a group so far, I think of about 9 that are going to go. If you are interested in coming down, it's going to be, or up, regardless where you are. It's going to be Sunday, December 4th, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Let us know right away. We can help you get tickets together with us in a block. Like I said, there's about 9 of us already. So message me, put it on Facebook, put it in the chat if you want to come, and we can talk to you about arranging to get tickets. Okay, I think that's everything. Is that everything? Whew, that was a lot. There's a lot going on, but exciting. I hope you guys are looking forward to these like I am. So now we get started with today's discussion. We are reading the amazing book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And our discussion leader today is Lynette. And before we start, I do want to show everybody, I know it said in the book not to purchase sweetgrass, but I didn't have any other way to get it. So I actually on Etsy bought a little piece, and I have to attest, it smells absolutely heavenly, absolutely amazing. So this is my tiny piece. Here it is, authentic sweetgrass braided. And I haven't decided if I'm going to light it and do anything with it, but as it is now, it's just amazing. So welcome everybody, and let's turn it over to Lynette and get started.
Well, hello, everyone. My name's Lynette, and I live in Northern California. I'm actually in Utah right now in an Airbnb. So this cow and I are hanging out, and we are ready to talk about this book. Just a couple of things before we start in. I don't usually read the slides. So if there's a quote on the slide, you get to read it to yourself. And also, there will be a few polls popping up. So if you would take the time to fill in those polls, some of them are just for fun, but some of them will be very interesting, I think, and we'll see what people thought of this book and some attitudes that we have. So it's always interesting to look at a book and look at all the things we can learn from it. This book has so many themes that we could spend hours and hours talking about it. I just picked out a few. But I looked at what Robin Kimmerer said about this book, and this is her purpose for having this book. She said she offers a braid of stories meant to heal our relationship with the world. And when you look at it from that point of view, I think it really is an amazing book. It has an amazing purpose. Next slide, please. Melinda, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so interesting things about this book. It was published by a very small publisher, Milkweed Editions, which is a nonprofit publisher. There's no mass marketing, it's just word of mouth. And so you can see that this was published in 2013, and it took it over 6 years to become a national bestseller. And that's because it was passed by word of mouth. Nobody knew about it unless somebody told them about it. And Kimmerer gave an interview, and she talked about this. She said, according to the booksellers, people come in and buy a copy because they've heard about it. Then they're back in a week or two to buy a stack because they want to give them to people. And that is how the book is moving. It's people connecting to it and saying, yes, this is it. I want to share this with others. Kimmerer says, I couldn't be happier that that's how it's happening, because it's connecting with people. And I think sometimes we feel we're alone in our passion for the living world. People are longing for a deep connection to nature, and then they find a book like Braiding Sweetgrass that gives them a vocabulary to express that relationship that they'd like to have with the living world. And then they want to share it with others. And this is the most interesting part, I think. The next thing that Kimmerer says, she says, the thing I love about it is that is the way the plant sweetgrass is disseminated. It is not a plant whose seeds blow all over the place and can establish anywhere. Essentially, it has to be transplanted hand to hand, and that's how the book is making its way in the world too. So at this point in time, this book has been on the national or the New York Times bestseller list for over 2 years now. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is a very interesting person. If you've read the book, you gathered that just from reading it. She has written one other book called Gathering Moss, which is a natural and cultural history of mosses, which also won an award for natural history writing. And she's a speaker as well. I went on her website and found that on average over the next 3 or 4 months, she has 6 speaking engagements every month, mostly to colleges and environmental groups. Okay, next slide. Okay, in the book, I'm going to call her Robin because her last name is hard to say. Robin tells us that she is a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. And then she also talks about the Anishinaabe. I keep practicing that word and I can't ever say it right. And so I was confused about what all these groups were. So I thought I'd try to help you understand it. So the Anishinaabe is a group of indigenous peoples, and you can read the names over here. Some of them I recognized, some of them I did not. And they live in what is today Canada and the United States. Of course, they didn't have those boundaries for them. And they shared a lot of cultural and mythical practices. They have similar traditions. Next slide, please. And then Robin also talks about the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I didn't know that word before, but I'd heard of the Iroquois. And they're also called that, the Iroquois nations or the 5 nations. You can see the nations there that have joined, and they are called the people of the Longhouse. They have many traditions that are similar with the Potawatomi, and they lived in a, there were neighbors basically. They lived in similar areas, so they share a lot. So let's get into one of the first themes. The very first book, story that she tells is about sky women. So we need the next slide for this. So for those who haven't read the book, I'm just going to do a quick retelling of the story of Sky Woman. This is a creation myth, and Sky Woman, as you can see in this painting by a native artist, the Sky Woman falls from the sky place down into the place where some of the animals live. As she's falling, the geese come under her. They help her down, and Turtle says, well, she can land on my back. So they put her there. And then the animals dive down into the lake and grab some mud, and they spread it across Turtle, and they pound it down, and that has become Turtle Island, which is what the Anishinaabe call their home, is Turtle Island. As Sky Woman was falling, she grabbed a branch of the tree as she fell, and this is the tree of life. And this tree had seeds for every plant, which it seems incredible, right? But that sounds really fun. So she planted all of the seeds from this, and the first seed to grow was the sweetgrass. Now, as Rebecca has told us, it's used ceremonially, it smells wonderfully, and they braid it to make baskets, and they talk about sweetgrass as the hair of Mother Earth. So just think about that image of braiding your mother's hair or braiding a child's hair. And that is how they feel about sweetgrass. Let's go to the next slide. Now, as you think about, this is another picture of sky woman falling. And this is one that Robin talks about in her book. Think about the creation story that you grew up with. And I'm going to assume that it's probably the Adam and Eve story. A woman comes, there's a tree, there's fruit. The woman does something. And then that brings horrible things to the world, right? It brings sadness, it brings death, it brings all of these bad things. Then contrast that with the Sky Woman story. Sky Woman comes, she brings seeds, she plants them, she has given herself for the people. I kind of like the Sky Woman story. I think I'm going to forget the other one. So I want you to think about myths. Are they important? Let's have some discussion now. Why do we have myths? Do you have any creation stories that resonate with you? Okay, where do I see hands up? Okay, Rebecca. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I clapped my hand instead of raising my hand, but I did mean, I was going to say I had the same reaction as you, Lynette, when I never believed the creation story as taught when I was, young LDS. I always just thought, that couldn't possibly have happened. That's not real. And when I read the Sky Woman story, I just thought, I love this. I can choose to believe this. It absolutely resonated, and it was beautiful and so positive, and just such a difference from what most of us were raised on, where it was, angry and sad and bitter and sorrowful. This was just a beautiful celebration. So I had the same reaction.
Thank you. Troy.
So across the world and across many different cultures, all of them have different creation myths, and they're very different, but they're equally ridiculous if you think about it. But they're useful, and myths can bind people together and kind of give them a common heritage. And then, the most widespread myth is that money has value, that money is valuable. It's not inherently, it's just a piece of paper, but everybody accepts this myth, and so therefore it's useful. So a lot of these myths can be useful.
Great comment. Thank you. Landon.
Yeah, I like the fact that this tied so many of the books that we've read to get before. You start to see the commonality between them. And in Sapiens, we read about the importance of myths and how myths is what makes people work together for a common good. And she said in her book, she said, we shouldn't talk about restoration. What we need to talk about is restoration, or telling new stories, or bringing these stories back to life. And I thought that as I read the book, I really thought, wow, this is really what we're missing. I think so much when we talk about environmentalism or whatever nowadays, it's, are you using paper or plastic, and you're, kind of criticized if you don't. But we don't tell a new story. And when the story she told resonated with me, that Earth and people work together, that's the way that we're going to solve this. And I think that if we could promote that myth, and I say myth, that myth doesn't necessarily have to mean it's not true. But if we could build that truth globally, I think that's really the solution to the problem she brought up, is creating a myth that we can all understand and all buy into, because as we learned in Sapiens, that's what binds people together and makes them work together for a more common good. So I thought that restoration, or teaching a new myth, is really vital for what she was trying to teach us in the book.
That's a great concept. Thank you, Landon. Cara.
Hi. So I've often reflected, looking back at the Christian creation myth, which those of us who went through the temple and got our endowments kind of had beat into us, that the Christian creation myth contrasts so sharply with Native American creation myths, in that in the Christian creation myth, there's a patriarchal hierarchy between the earth and humans. God tells Adam and Eve, you're in charge, this is for you. And and if you look closely at it, there's supposed to be this sense of stewardship. And instead, it's been a story of thousands of years of exploitation, where in the Native American myths, and I've only read them in a cursory way, I'm not an expert or anything, I get this feeling of the earth is and its creatures are here for us to live with, to only take what we need and give back when we can. I think the differences in that view are just profound, and from my understanding, a creation myth is what sets up our cosmological view and our relationship to deity, if we believe in one, our relationship to each other, and our relationship to the earth and its other creatures.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Luann. I think you need to unmute your mic.
The story was the book. I mean, it was a brilliant start. It created it told of a love of life, of being born into gratitude, to being rescued by other species, growing things, seeds. It was just, it just started the reverence that existed through the entire book. And it is my creation story now too. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Luann. Yeah. I don't think I have control over taking people's hands down after they speak. So if somebody can do that for me, I'd appreciate it. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is about asters and goldenrod. And if you remember the story, Robin was about to enter college and she wanted to study botany. When she was talking to a professor, he asked her, well, why do you want to study botany? And her response was, I want to know why asters and goldenrod look so good together. So here's a picture of asters and goldenrod, and yes, they are beautiful together. Robin's idea was, I want to commune with nature. I want to understand it. I want to know how this works. And the professor told her, well, that's not science. And so he was looking at it from a very different point of view. He said, you know, we don't look at beautiful things in science. That's not where we're at. I'll put you in a beginning biology class. And she said, that made me doubt myself. And I thought about this a lot because I have been talked to by others. Others have told me, well, you know, you shouldn't do this, you should do this. And I began to doubt myself. So I want to know, what have you done in your life when somebody makes you doubt yourself? What do you do to get back to your center and understand that you make the choices for you? And then a question that's totally different. How can we participate with nature? Yes, Landon.
I think that comes with maturity. I think when you're young, you tend to defer that everybody else has more experience than you, and you tend to take authority figures and follow them and what they say. I certainly did this with the church. I look back and I say my entire life was built around following what someone else told me that I had to do, and I shaped my entire the way I lived my life. Everything came from what they told me I had to do. So that's why it's so frustrating when I see them now saying that you have to go on a mission, you know, that you've already made that promise, and they start making these young people feel like they have to do things and not let them choose to do them or follow what they determine is best for them. And as you get older, I think you just start to, you don't give a damn anymore. you say, I've learned everyone else has told me things and it never works out, so I'm just going to do what's right for me. So I think a lot of it comes from maturity, and as you experience things, you start to grow. But it was beautiful the way she worded it and the way she said it, that she then proved that it was scientific method to this. And I just said, wow, that was just a great learning thing for me to see. Yeah, you gotta just sometimes say, I don't care what anyone else says, I'm doing what I want.
Thank you. Yes, in her story, there's this power dynamic, this power differential between the professor and the student. And, that happens in the church, that happens in jobs, that happens in all kinds of places where you have a person of power or authority that tells you something, and it may or may not be the right thing that you need to hear. Jackie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I find that when I doubt myself, which is what I love about this book club, is I dig for information. And to feel more strong in trusting my gut. And so I think, like a lot of people in this book club, like when we start having our faith crises, we started reading and researching and digging. And so that's probably how I went about it, was, making sure, am I making a wrong mistake? Are these facts really playing out? And so for me, it's just digging into research and knowledge to support that, trust yourself. And then on the second one, on getting into nature, just kind of a personal comment. My husband last year said, this water situation in Utah is really bad. I'm tired of mowing lawns. And we started xeriscaping our yard, and we xeriscaped the backyard. And this year we're xeriscaping the front yard. And the fun part about this is we're planting all these plants and pulling out the old grass. How many people stop and talk to us on our street and our road, and neighbors we've never said a word to? And by putting in these new plants and changing the landscape, it's creating connection. And so nature creates connection in all kinds of ways, on a personal level with just us and the world, but it has totally connected us to some people on our street that have never done more than wave at us. People stop on the road. My husband has 30-minute discussions with people as they watch these plants come in, and they're slowly watching our front yard transform, because it's taken us 6 months to do this. And so that's the side of nature that we're seeing and enjoying, is our personal connection and connecting other people.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Sometimes we talk about nature and we think about nature, we don't realize that it can connect us to other people too. Yeah, I just recently read a book called Nature Fix or something like that. And it talks about how being in nature for 30 minutes can really help a person emotionally and physically even. And I was talking to my daughter about that, and she says that just shows the great power of nature, that just 30 minutes out in nature can change from a person feeling depressed to a person feeling happy. And I thought that was great. Rebecca.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Lynette. My parents have recently moved into an assisted living facility. And of course, it's, very institutional, but there is a terrace area and sort of an arboretum kind of an area where you can access it from inside the building. And they all the residents, the people I've gotten to know, and my parents, that's where you always find them. That is where they gravitate towards. They can't, a lot of them, go outside very often, but the indoors has become the outdoors in this one particular room, and the windows are open and they can see plants and they can go out on the terrace. And there's a reason they all gravitate there. And there's a reason, like you just said, they feel healing, they feel mood elevation. It's just wonderful. And even if you cannot actually be outdoors, you can experience outdoors in other ways like that. So that really had an impact on me when I saw how they all their little walkers and their wheelchairs, and they all go down to this one room, which is the outdoors indoors. So it's beautiful.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful that they're doing it that way now. Brandon.
Hi. One of the things I do when others try to make me doubt myself is, one thing is, a lot of things in life are not guaranteed. And so therefore, you just have to be able to be human and say, you know what, if I make a mistake, it's okay. So the thing is to always keep that in mind, is that You're going to make mistakes as a human, irrespective of whether the individual stops you or not. And I think that's a learning experience for you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that comment. Anybody else before we go on? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so here's a picture of sweetgrass. And the story that I want to talk about is when Robin had a graduate student that needed a project. And Robin had talked to many of the older women in her culture that harvest the sweetgrass and that braid it and make baskets. There's a picture of baskets there. And they were of the opinion that when you talk to the plants and ask them permission to use them and use them carefully, then they grow better. So she said, well, when you harvest them, do you pull out the roots or do you just carefully pull out the stems? And different people did it different ways. And so she decided to have her graduate student do this experiment. They took it to the dean, and of course the dean says, oh, come on, everybody knows that if you harvest a crop, it makes it worse. I don't think we need to do this project. But they persevered and they got the dean to okay the project. It went on for a couple of years. They had plots that they just left alone. They had plots that were harvested in both ways. And they found at the end that the plots that were harvested they had stronger plants, they were growing, and they were even spreading. They were continuing to grow. And the reason she came up with this in the first place was that there are many places where sweetgrass is disappearing. And so it's becoming more and more endangered. So they went through the whole project. And one thing I want to bring out about this is that it was women scientists doing this, and the dean was a male. And in the middle of this, they had to endure some verbal smackdowns, some condescension. And so that's a whole theme right there. But they gathered all their data and they put it all together and they brought it to the dean, and they showed that either way of harvesting made the plants better. And she said the dean was silent. He had no comeback because he had been shown with the data that it was correct. And she said the basket makers just smiled. They already had the answer. They knew. So here's some of my questions that I thought about. Is there is a lot of wisdom out there, and sometimes we only have a particular way of gathering wisdom. Are we ignoring some of the wisdom that's out there? Daniel, you have a comment.
Yeah, on the story with the dean, you know, I don't mean to be contrarian here, but I had to call kind of bull crap on that because the story doesn't hold water for me, because it's widely recognized in agriculture that there are lots and lots of plants where pruning them, you know, selectively harvesting them makes them grow better. I mean, that's like totally common knowledge. Like, her story of the dean, it didn't make any sense to me. The dean would be so you know, set on, oh, that cannot be, it cannot be. The story sounded not completely truthful to me, or maybe her remembering of it is not completely accurate. She lost me on that story, because I was like, I mean, there are tons of stuff, bulbs, you know, we know over and over, like irises, if you just leave them alone, they get all matted and they don't grow well. But if every year, if you harvest some, you take them out, you thin them out, all that kind of stuff, they grow much better. You know, we have foresters. You know, one of my friend's dads growing up in Vermont was a forester, and we've known for a long time that if you go through and you thin out the forest and you take out certain things, the forest actually grows better and it grows healthier. So anyway, so like this dean character that she was making up, he seemed sort of fictional to me, or that she was remembering it inaccurately.
Thank you for pointing that out, Daniel. And I appreciate you bringing that up. because, you know, when she told the story, I thought, well, yeah, you know, if a plant gets root bound, or like the bulbs that you talked about. So that's interesting. I can't say whether the dean said that or not, but I thought it was great that she was pointing out that there's some indigenous wisdom that's not being used. And that was kind of the point that I was looking to. So.
Yeah, and I completely agree, you know, so the message is good, but she lost me a little bit on the storytelling.
Sure. No, I understand. I understand that. Thank you for bringing that up, because I hadn't quite gone that far with my thought process. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, how about the next question? Oh, okay, Luann.
I've been a gardener all my life, and the book made me realize I don't know what reverence for the earth is. There's so many words in the book, so many actions that I don't associate with my understanding of agriculture. I liked what she said very much. I know my parents made beautiful gardens, and that's why I garden, is I grew up with the lushness of vegetables growing and the delicious harvest and the vegetables on the dinner table. I really appreciate the knowledge I gained, and I've got my life ahead to figure out how to apply it as I try to grow things in Texas dirt.
Yeah. So, you know, I've thought a lot about this too, because I have grown a garden my entire life. I grew up with parents who gardened. My grandfathers were both fruit farmers. And so I've been in that horticultural type of environment all of my life. And as I read this book, I thought, well, you know, I do not go thank the trees. I do not do all the things she talks about. Do I really have reverence for these trees? But, you know, if the trees start to get sick, it makes me sad. And I try to find a way to help them. And every year we prune the trees, and every year we do other things to try to make the trees grow. But she did help me think about this more and think, am I being kind enough to my plants? Am I thinking about them, or am I just thinking about myself? Cara.
So when I haven't finished reading this book, I'm about halfway through it, but the way she talks about, you know, working with nature, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I'm originally from Iowa, and as we all know, a big swath of that state is devoted to monoculture, you know, corn, soybeans, and most of it's industrial use or to feed animals raised in factory farms, which is a whole nother issue. But I sometimes envision my home state restored to some of its glory, and I don't know if it can ever happen, but I mean, I'd love to see some of the forest restored, a lot of the prairie restored, have the farmland that's devoted to, you know, raising grain for factory farming to feed animals that are not raised in humane conditions, turned over to raising food for people, like maybe more native plants and such. And I don't know, I don't have a complete understanding of it, so I can't really say more than that. But I really wonder, I mean, it makes me think about my brother, who had a little hobby farm outside our hometown. He had a big hill that ran down to a pond, and one year he planted nothing but native flowers and grasses on that whole hillside. And the next year it was he mowed a path through it, and you could walk through it, and the flowers and the weeds, sorry, not the weeds, the native grasses. There goes my old understanding of things. You could walk through it and everything was taller than you. You could see hummingbirds and pollinators, and it was just this living, humming, singing biomass. I've never forgotten that. And I just have to wonder if we had a better understanding of what all of our local landscapes would really look like if we could revert them back to what they were before and raise things that truly thrive there. I don't know. This part of this is impractical dreaming, but this book and others like it just make me kind of sit here and dream of what that would be for different parts of the country. It might be amazing. Yeah,
I agree. Thank you very much. And you know, in the comments here, people are talking about the difference between a plant and a weed. And yeah, that's an interesting distinction. When we think we're in control of the land, a lot of things look like weeds to us. And if we just let nature do its thing, then maybe those things aren't so much weeds.
yeah. I have a sister who lives in Wisconsin, and she hasn't mowed her lawn. Excuse me, she hasn't had grass in her lawn for 2 or 3 years. She does mow it, but she eats off of her yard. There's purslane, there's all sorts of stuff that is nutritional or medicinal. She has edible flowers growing in it. It's amazing. And she doesn't, the grass is slowly disappearing. It's been amazing to watch. I don't know, makes you rethink how we've been taught we should do things as far as our yards go.
Thank you. Could we have that poll question pop up here? And then Luann, do you have a comment for us?
I was just going to mention 1491 and the picture of America as cultivated and managed. And then the picture of the Native Americans dying from disease before the settlers arrived, and the disarray that caused, letting things go completely wild, that there is a middle ground. So that was the main thing, is just I love that book 1491 and its touch of nature, and I just associated the two together just now and just wanted to mention it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so here's the poll popping up. If you want to just take a minute and take that poll. Just one last thing about this chapter. I really liked that she put the entire chapter written as a scientific paper format. You had the intro, the discussion, the methods, and then at the end, the references were the buffalo, the sweetgrass, and the ancestors. And I thought that was fabulous, just very, very creative there, that she put the whole chapter into scientific paper format. Did anybody else notice that?
Hi.
I hope so. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Oh, okay, here's our okay, looks like we're doing pretty good. We're mostly respectful of the earth. This is great. Love seeing that on the poll. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about Acer saccharum. So this is the sugar maple that she talks about, and how they get the lovely maple syrup from it, and how the leaves are so beautiful in the fall time. I see Brian has a comment for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment real quick on the results of the poll. I was reading through the options, and the last option is what I ended up choosing, where I try to be respectful, but I feel like I contribute to things. And I was thinking about that, just that it's really hard to live in this world and not feel like you're contributing, if you're honest. I mean, I drive a car, so I'm contributing to greenhouse gas. The way I consume, I'm consuming lots of food that's probably processed or sometimes grown or created in a way that's not necessarily the most environmental. But how do you get out of that? Because I mean, unless you try to go live off the grid and not be a part of society and culture, like you're contributing to, you know, the effects we see in our environment. Anyway, that was just my comment.
Oh, that's a great comment. And I've had the same question in my own life. What can I do? I mean, there are a few little things that we always talk about and maybe they help. But that is, you know, there's a lot of people on this earth and we live in a society that is very consumer oriented and it is not necessarily respectful to the earth. So I don't have the answer. Maybe Landon does.
Yeah, I don't think I have the answer, but I know there's certainly some things that can be done. I know when Cara was talking about, you know, restoring the prairies to the Midwest, and I think, yeah, that sounds wonderful. But then I also say, but I eat that food. Would there be enough food if I restored all of that? But there are things, you know, they've now gone with the hydroponic agriculture. And there's a lot of different ways that they're now growing food much more in a much more condensed location. And I know here in Utah, water is a big problem we have. We don't have enough water in the West. And one of the things I read is it's like 10 times as much water is used to flood irrigate as to if you use, you know, the irrigation with the sprinkler systems and stuff like that. So things like that can be done. And I think she had a good balance in her book. She, you know, she said I think she kind of pointed out, we don't have to, it's not one or the other. We have to work together. And so I don't think we can restore everything, but I think we can restore some things and make a better balance, at least without doing everything. But I don't know. That's Troy probably has better statistics on that from his work, but that was my thoughts.
Thank you, Landon. Joe?
Yeah, I was, so when I was going to college and stuff, I took a bunch of classes in landscape architecture and some other stuff. And it's impressive how much we in the United States have managed water resources, managed like land resources. I was watching the game of, Ring of Power the other day, and the elves world had all this water just flowing down off the mountains. And I was like, look at that. They don't even know how to capture their own water. Anyway, I'm kind of in that camp of, like we were talking, if we don't cultivate the things, they don't really grow as great. You know, there needs to be some sort of interaction there. But anyway, really interesting book and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. So when she's talking about the maples, at some point, she talks about taking her students out and seeing nature, and they had a discussion about our language and how we refer to trees as it, and that the native peoples talk about the trees as the Maple Nation, or you know, the Cattail Nation, or the Bear people, or the Turtle people. And you know, my husband and I have spent a lot of time studying plants and trying to learn their names, especially the native plants. So when we go on walks, we can identify them. And sometimes you see a plant and you say, oh, that's, you know, I don't know. Can't think of a plant name now, of course, I've gone blank. But when you see that plant, it feels like a friend. So let's think about, you know, what can we do? Do we view trees and animals as it, as things, as something for us to use? What can we learn from them? Can we see them differently? And most of all, for me, do you see nature differently after reading this book? I think I really liked the idea of referring to trees as people and referring to animals as, you know, our friends, our neighbors. Rebecca.
Yeah, so my mom has always done this. I realized after reading the book, she always is very attuned to plants and trees, and she calls them he or she. She once, there was a car accident in our front yard, and our sycamore tree was damaged as a car, you know, careened into it. She called 911 not for the car and the people, they were okay, but for the tree. And I was at another person's house at the time. We were listening to a police scanner, and I clearly heard my mother's voice on 911 talking about this tree. And of course, everybody at the place I was at said, "Who is this crazy person?" And I pretended I didn't know, but I knew it was my mother. She had called 911 on a tree. But she loves her plants so much, and I have seen visible evidence that they love her back. As I said, we just moved them into assisted living, and for a while, for about a month, I was caring for her violets. She had about 18 violet plants, and under my care, they turned brown, they withered, they sunk. It was terrible. I took them over to her new apartment, and I'm not kidding. I could tell when they saw her, like they started to tremble. They recognized her, and within days they were green again. Their leaves were sprouting. It was very interesting to me because I could literally see that the care and love of a plant, it was reciprocated right there. I wish I had a picture to show you what they looked like under my care and a few days later under my mom, but they recognized her. I could literally feel just this energy of them moving toward her, wanting to be around her. So it's powerful and it's real.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story. I appreciate that. Daniel.
So I love trees and I love plants. When we go out walking, I'm always identifying them. I think I annoy my family because I'm always like, do you know what kind of tree that is? And I identify the trees. I grow a lot of plants at home. I have a garden. I have succulents all over the place, and I love plants. But on this idea of calling trees he and she and this, I strongly feel, largely because of the circumstances, things that have happened in my life, that it's always best to start from the most knowledge we have and then go from there. So we know trees don't feel the way that humans do. We know it's not a tree person. You know what I'm saying? We have enough information in science now that we know it's not a tree person. There's not really a spirit inside there. But, some of the science now talks about certain trees and how they communicate and the benefits they are, the symbiosis we have, and all those things. And so I think it's possible to love trees and find them beautiful and want to care for them, but that it's important to operate from the best knowledge that we have and what we really understand about it. Like I said, a lot of things have led me to this point in my life, but I'm not a big fan of making up things and telling people that it's like a tree person and the tree has a spirit. And that's the reason why we should respect it and take care of it, because, there's a tree nymph or something living inside of it, or it feels things that it doesn't feel. I think we can arrive at the proper answer with the truth. And I think it's always better to start from the best knowledge we have and the most information we have.
Thank you, Daniel. Can I say that when I'm talking about the tree people, I don't imagine that they're a person like I am, but in using that vocabulary, it makes me feel more respect for that other organism. So I understand what you're saying, that scientifically there's no person there, and I'm not believing that there is a tree nymph inside of the tree. But when I use that language of tree people, it does a switch in my brain and makes me respect the tree more than I have in my past, just because of the way that I grew up. Does that make sense to you?
It makes complete sense, and I completely understand it. I just, like I said, largely because of the things I've experienced in my life, I am very skeptical of that. People saying, I have a useful lie, because
Okay.
the word person has and I completely understand how it's useful and it can be helpful to you, but the word person has a meaning, it has and so it actually is deceptive to call it a tree person. So anyway, so I like I said, I understand.
Thank you.
think
Maybe you can help me get a better vocabulary.
yeah, and I think it can be useful, like in some senses, but I don't think it's optimal. Because I think we can arrive at the same place by looking at truth. Like I said, if we look at the truth of trees, we are codependent with trees and plants, and we need each other. These are things that we need, and we need to take care of them, and we need to love them. And trees have a life, and they're a living organism, and we should respect it for that. And I think we can arrive at the same love and the same respect for them without putting a layer on it that at some level is either, untrue or dishonest.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to try to find a better word. Thank you. Karen.
Well, I agree and disagree at the same time, because for me, yes, I'm a great believer in science, but I also am a great believer that there are many mysteries in life that we really do not understand. And I like the concept of Sky Woman. I like the concept of a nation of trees. And I personally, on my property, have trees that I love. And there are 2 large trees in the backyard, and one of them is very deformed, and I don't know why, but I feel so sorry for it. And when I do the watering, I tend to water that one first because I don't want it to feel like it's going to be forgotten. And it's like, it's so silly on one level, but on another level, I'm taking care of my trees and I'm thinking about what they need. And I love my trees. So I have a very strong feeling towards plants and animals.
One quick thing I want to jump in there is that if people are finding, and I don't want you to change, Lynette, if you like calling it a tree person, that is a-okay for you. If you feel like calling it a tree person works for you, I do not want to change your mind about that. These are just my feelings on it. Like I can't call it a tree person, and so anyway, I don't want to change anybody else. If you look at it and you're like, what, I find it useful to call that a tree person, by all means, go ahead and call it a tree person. It's just not for me. Like I said, I've been burned too many times by
well,
that
that's
kind of
true.
thing.
Yeah, and I'm not proposing that either, and I don't use that term, but I have a strong sense of connection to my trees. But no, I don't call them tree people. But I do wonder sometimes what they do feel.
I think that's a great question. And I think that there are studies that are getting us a little more information. I think there's a book, is it called The Life of Trees? I can't remember. That's an excellent read that talks about how trees communicate with each other through, I guess, hormonal and chemical signals through their roots. And it's fascinating read. Anne, what do you have for us?
I was just going to say that I enjoyed both aspects of this book, but I really liked the science part of it because it wasn't too complex, but it was really interesting and it blended in well with anthropomorphism and so forth. And so I enjoyed probably mostly the science part. But with respect to trees being people, I have to say that during this past pandemic, the most exciting thing that ever happened to me and my husband, because we are sheltering a lot in place, was that we had this enormous blue spruce yard that's been there ever since we moved here 30 years ago. And it's gotten to be about 60 feet tall. And we have been having a lot of high winds in our neck of the woods. And those kind of trees don't have very deep roots. And it's the most gorgeous tree you can imagine. But we decided because of the winds that tree had to be cut down. And it's an enormous tree, the most beautiful tree you've ever seen. So the guys came over with all their equipment, climbing up into that huge tree all the way to the top, and then getting the saw and sawing it off bit by bit. And we put out our lawn chairs and watched that from a distance. We videotaped it. It was very exciting. All the neighborhood kids kept wanting to get in our backyard to watch it. And I kind of felt like I was watching a murder. It's kind of like a true crime thing. I mean, I really felt guilty about cutting down that tree. And so I know that I do have some anthropomorphizing going on in my mind. And I think that's okay. I mean, I don't take it totally seriously. But every time And you know what? Our yard looks 10 times better now that it's not there. So, and I feel guilty even saying that, because you should never be happy to cut down a tree. But I personally have, once in a while, I wear that lens of anthropomorphizing, and I just think it's part of being human. But ultimately speaking, I'm kind of more in the science camp. So I guess it's okay to flip back and forth between those two things.
Yeah. Well, I thought Robin did an excellent job of interweaving the science with the indigenous myth, shall we call it. I thought she brought out many aspects that were really good. Sean, what do you have for us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean. I'm one of the newer people here. I'm from Southern Michigan. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I also put myself in the science camp, and I love what Daniel said about, the fact that there's things that we just don't know. If I were to use a different word, I think maybe the word is consciousness. That's one of the areas of science that we know so little about. And when I think of our fellow living organisms that surround us in the universe, the universe is full of life and full of intelligence in all different forms. And so whether it's a tree or a plant or whatever we're talking about, it may not be a person, but I do consider, there's probably something there that we don't understand about this living thing that involves some consciousness. I think of the planets and stars, and I think of everything that the universe is filled with, and I think there's probably a lot of things that we don't understand, but it's probably full of all kinds of consciousness that we just don't get. And so that's what I think of when I think of the earth, and I think of the beautiful way that Robin has kind of laid this out to help us, think of it differently, that these are parts of our entire living organism of the earth that should be respected. And I guess that's my take on it. So I really have enjoyed this.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, let's go to Jackie and then Luann, and then we're going to move on.
Just very quickly, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts on all ends of the spectrum. My husband and I talk about myth all the time, and we talked about literature, and we said, they're powerful tools for teaching truth. And, we all know truth is subjective, but we sometimes think it's even more powerful than literal, numbers, knowledge, facts, quote, science. And so I love the book for me because it was all myth, but what it taught me has been so helpful. And I do feel a deep connection with living things. And so I like the thought now that this discussion is brought up. Is there other terms we can be using? Is there other things? I'm thinking a lot of connection, of just there's life in general. So I don't think we have to get too detailed. I don't think we have to get pigeonholed. I don't think we have to pick a camp. I think we can learn truth in many different ways. And for me, this book has opened my eyes to be more respectful of Earth, to be more appreciative of Earth, of living things, and how I can create a connection with that. So I appreciate everybody's comments because I'm learning from everyone.
Thank you, Jackie. Luann. Luann, are you there? Okay, let me just say that I'm really appreciating all the comments in the chat. And the book that I mentioned, I couldn't remember the title correctly, is called The Hidden Life of Trees, and somebody put a link for that. I appreciate that very much. Let's move on to the next slide.
I think Luann is off mute now. So.
I'm sorry that I'm struggling with my mute. Thank you, Lynette. Just again and again, she gave such beautiful examples of interspecies cooperation. And one example that really touched my curiosity was when she was talking about the salmon and the trees. I forget which kind of tree, but the huge, huge trees. And they said scientific analysis had shown that the nitrogen in some of these old trees was from the salmon. And it just makes you wonder about life, you know, as part of us goes into something else. It just really makes you want to honor life. And we have so many unanswered questions about what life is and what life is after death. It's just kind of tickling my fancies to kind of visualize some of the things she's describing. Thank you.
Thank you, Luann. Okay, I just wanted to spend a moment on this next slide about the honorable harvest. She talks about the steps that in the Native peoples take when they go out to harvest, learning about the plant, introducing themselves to the plant, asking permission. Some of these, you know, like introducing yourself and asking permission are very foreign ideas to me. So I would have to think about them a lot more before they would certainly become part of my life. But many of the other things they talk about are ecologically sound. Never take the first or the last. Well, that's very important, right? If we take the first one and that's the only one, then it's gone forever. Take only what we need. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Never take more than half. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Again, harvest with minimal harm. Yeah, we've seen what happens when we clear cut things. Use them respectfully, share. Give thanks. Again, this is something that I haven't thought about that much, giving thanks or giving a gift back. But if you talk about the gifts that they give, they always give the tobacco gift. And I'm thinking, well, they're maybe giving nutrients that that tree needs or that plant needs. You know, we fertilize, we do things like that. So I think a lot of the things we talk about, we just use a few different words than they do, but we can really make our you know, nature sustainable if we follow the honorable harvest. So I'm not going to take comments on this because we have a few other things I'd like to talk about. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, this story really hit me hard when she talked about how her daughter didn't want to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and she said, you know, well, Mom, I just don't believe in it, and it's not exactly liberty if they force you to say it. And then talking about gratitude and how in the indigenous cultures, they give a Thanksgiving prayer to the earth, basically, to say thanks for the earth. Let's look at the next slide. Here's an Iroquois Thanksgiving prayer. So that would be in the eastern part of the United States. I was talking to my daughter who lives in Seattle or near Seattle, and she went to a soccer game there, the Sounders soccer game. And at the beginning of the game, they had everybody stand up and repeat something very similar to this, giving thanks to the earth. And she said, I thought it was absolutely beautiful. So I want us to reflect for a few minutes about giving thanks and being grateful. And how is it important to express gratitude to nature? Does that make sense? Does it help nature? Does it help us? What are some of your ideas about gratitude? Landon.
That's one of the things, you know, now that I don't pray and at Thanksgiving time and when the family comes over, we're kind of always at a loss as to what do you do to say thanks, you know, who do you thank? But this book gave us some ideas. In fact, that she talked about the corn pouch, and I love the story about the three sisters, which again goes back to some of the other books we've read, and the corn and the beans and the squashes. And for our family this year, we've decided we're going to take and give those seeds in that packet, just like she described. And we're going to read this Thanksgiving prayer together for our Thanksgiving. And I liked, is this the same one where they say we are one at each of the paragraphs? So
I
we
think
thought,
so,
yeah, we were going to give each of the kids one of those, and then they'd read it. And at the end, we could all say we are one. and just something to, to be able to say thanks without necessarily giving thanks to a being or whatever, but just thanks to nature for providing all that we get, because it, the earth does give us so much. We love exploring the earth. We love going outdoors and playing in it, and we love the bounty that it gives us. So this is something we're going to introduce in our family because of this book. I had never heard of it before, but we're going to implement it.
Thank you. Yeah, I liked that idea too. Rebecca.
Yeah, I also really, really love this prayer. I was raised in a very Orthodox Mormon household, and we were forced to pray quite a bit. Personal prayers, family morning prayers, breakfast prayers. That's 3 prayers before I even left to school. Had to pray at lunchtime in the cafeteria, pray for dinner, personal prayers, family prayers. If you went to a church event, you're saying opening prayer, closing prayer. I mean, there were days when I could be praying 12 times in a day. And it's extremely rote. I never felt anything when I said these prayers because we were definitely checked on it. Did you remember your prayer? Did you remember to say thank you? Did you pray? To me, it was very militant. It pretty much drove the gratitude that I would feel naturally out of everything. And this went on from a very young age. So I stopped praying when I was a teenager because I didn't like that. I knew it was coerced. I knew I felt nothing. And I, like a lot of you have expressed, maybe don't pray anymore, at least in the way that we were encouraged to growing up in the church. But reading something like this and understanding that there are these very heartfelt, natural ways to think about and express gratitude, it's kind of opened my mind a little bit to think, you know what, maybe I need to try to incorporate this. I mean, I think I still have PTSD over the coerced prayer that I underwent, growing up, but maybe it can be a part of my life in a way going forward. So this was a very meaningful chapter to me about this prayer.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So I want to talk about just for a minute about when we view the world as a gift. She talked about taking her students out, and they were worried about where they were going to find food when they're living out in nature for a few days. She took them to the lake and just showed them, look, we can eat this part of the cattail, we can eat this, we can eat that. And the earth is our mother is another concept that she talks about a lot. So I guess what I want to ask people to talk about here is, does it make a difference if we come from the idea of we love the earth and the earth is our mother and the earth loves us back? Is that something that will help you? And I think for some people it might, and for some people it might not. Any thoughts on that? Yes, Cara.
Well, I sometimes think it's a matter of, the author talks a lot about the language that describes things and ideas that we, as I like to call us non-Native Americans, don't have. But sometimes it's just a matter of we don't know what's really around us. So last July, I was in Wisconsin with my sister, and we spent half a day hiking through the woods of Wisconsin, and she was pointing out different types of fungi and mushrooms and mosses and wild herbs, things that we would look at and say, oh, those are just weeds, but she knew their medicinal uses. She knew what was edible and what wasn't. And it gave a whole new layer of meaning to this beautiful landscape to know the words for things and what their relevance was to humankind. It just made the landscape come more alive. And I think I feel a lot that way reading Braiding Sweetgrass. Like I think it's on page 48 of the Kindle version I have. She talks about the ethnobotanist whose name I won't even try to pronounce in a treatise about some it's how do you pronounce it? Anishinaabe ethnobotanist. She talks about how there's a word in their language that translates as the force which causes mushrooms to push up from the earth overnight. There's not even an idea like that in our language, unless you want to talk about the scientific terms for growth and stuff. So anyway, I'm going to stop pontificating, but I think knowing the words for things and what they are in relation to us into the ecosystem can just bring the landscape alive for you.
Thank you, Cara. I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was something that I found very fascinating when she had these words from their language that meant a whole paragraph, practically a whole idea. And we don't have those words in English. And it is true that the words that we have affect how we think very much. So thank you for that. Landon, did we have a poll question for this slide or not?
I don't think we had one for this one.
Okay. You're going to have to just pop them up whenever,
okay.
because I'm not remembering when they're coming in. But I just want everybody to think about on this one, you know, she takes her students out, they live off the land, they build a shelter. And I want you to think about, could I do that? Would I be totally lost? Could I maybe get a little bit to eat? Would I eat the wrong thing and die because I ate the poisonous whatever? I just think that's something to contemplate for a minute. Oh, there we go. There's our poll. Okay, so while everybody's taking the poll, why don't we go on to the next slide? It's about rituals and ceremonies, and she brings up several rituals throughout the book, and I've just put a few here to think about, and we don't really have time to talk a lot about it, but I'd really like to know how, if anyone has found some rituals or ceremonies that have helped them, that you know are important to them, and how they might enhance your life. No rituals, no ceremonies. Okay, Landon.
I don't have any ceremonies per se that I do right now, but I love the coffee offering story. I just thought, you know, that's someone, it just shows appreciation for the earth, that they took the coffee and poured it onto the ground and just said, you know, here's your part, you know, almost like you're feeding the earth to say thank you. So I thought that was really cool. And even though the story came from someone who didn't, you know, when you look at the start of it, you know, how did this start? You know, did you think of it as offering to the earth? And it's like, no, we were just getting rid of the grounds, but it became important to us over time. And I think that we all can look at that and see where things can become important over time. And I think the ritual is important. It just brings remembrance. It reminds us to be mindful of these things.
Thank you. Melinda.
So like Landon mentioned, I don't know if we per se have anything like set as far as rituals and ceremonies go, but I know now after leaving Mormonism, we are trying to find things that might be able to become these rituals or ceremonies. You know, we just started last year with like Thanksgiving. So, and we are going to, like Landon already mentioned, we're going to try and continue on with these different thoughts and ways to show gratitude and things like that. But we're constantly discussing things that we, you know, it's hard not to regret, but I wish so much that we would have left Mormonism when our family was young, because I think so many of these things that we're talking about, we could have turned into something given time. now we're talking about from like a grandparent level, but like it's hard because we aren't the parent, right?
Right.
So we just as a refresher for anybody who doesn't know, we just recently have had 2 grandbabies this summer, and we've been trying to talk to them about like, well, you're not going to bless your baby at church, so here's some other, you know, suggestions. And it's not our place, right? Like it's not all, that's all we can do, and say, if you want to do anything, we're happy to help, you know, but we've been trying to think of different things. And feeding off of what Landon said about the Thanksgiving, you know, we're even thinking about like different recipes and stuff like that for this year. And we just had some really great corn on the cob. I think it's called eote. So we're trying to figure out like a recipe to do that. So we stopped and buy corn yesterday, and I'm like, how much should I get? And Landon's like, I don't know, just grab a dozen. And so I'm there picking corns out of, we just have like a farmer's market right down the street from our house. And I'm grabbing some corn, and I thought to myself, I can't buy a dozen. Like, we're just 2 people. There's no way we're going to eat that much corn in the time that it'll still be fresh. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take half. Just like taking my lessons from the book, right? So I got myself a half a dozen instead of a full dozen. And I know that's something just so absolutely tiny and insignificant, but it made me feel a little bit empowered, that I was like, you know what? I can become a better person every day. I can try and improve and show that gratitude and be thankful for the things that I have in a non-religious way, I guess, but just being more aware. And that is something that I was not mindful of as a religious person. And now I have all these doors open to me. And it's because of books like this that help me to identify ways that we can try. And even if we just try something once and it was a total flop, at least we tried it, and we'll think of something better.
I like that idea of trying new ceremonies or rituals to see if it works for your family. I think that's a great idea. Jackie.
Yeah, just very quickly. One thing I've always done, always innately, is when I hike or walk, I touch the flowers, I touch the leaves. I have a ritual of needing to touch. And I think it's just another way to connect. And then growing up, we always took our children, our vacations were almost always to the national parks, and they always involved hiking. And I didn't realize that, but that really was ritual for us. And letting our children run on the trails. And we were in southern Utah a lot, running up on the red rock. And again, their feet are on it, they're touching it, they're seeing it. And they're all pretty deeply connected to this earth, and love it and respect it. And so, you know, somebody said walking the dog. Yeah, I think all these are just tiny, small rituals that create connection. And I think we can all agree, whether it's literal or not literal or myth, finding respect for the earth and gratitude are just, they enhance our lives. They absolutely enhance our lives. So that's it.
Thank you, Jackie. Rebecca.
Yeah, this is something we talk about a lot in book club. We have over the last couple of years, is that now most of our rituals and ceremonies are gone as post-Mormons. They don't exist anymore. So what do we replace them with? We read a really awesome book last year by Sasha Sagan, the daughter of Carl Sagan, called Small Creatures Such as We, Finding Ritual and Meaning. I can't remember the rest of the title. Hopefully somebody can put it in the chat for our newer members, but it talked exactly about that, just creating meaning, creating rituals. So if you guys are on our Facebook page with us, under the featured tab, our book club member Spencer has created a wonderful spreadsheet where we can actually add rituals and ceremonies that we have come up with for ourselves. If if we feel open to sharing them with others. And there's quite a few things on there. I would love to see more. So if we do come up with things that are enhancing our lives and are more of a ritual type ceremony, please add those to that spreadsheet. It's a working document, and it has categories, exactly what, like kind of Melinda was talking, what should we do now for a baby blessing, or what should we do for this? And it's really interesting to look through, and it's under the featured tab on our Facebook page. So take a look.
Thanks for that. Yeah, well, I'll have to look into that. Sean.
Yeah, funny you should ask, Lynette. I was just having this conversation with my therapist this last week. So I'm probably one of the few people, or maybe only people on this group, who's still actively participating in the church right now. I've kind of set up camp on the bridge between Mormonism and ex-Mormonism, and sometimes that bridge is really wobbly. But one of the things that I've done to kind of deal with the things that I experience in the church from a mental health standpoint is to look at everything as a ritual, where everybody else might be thinking everything is so literal and absolutely essential to surviving in the next life. I'm looking at it as it's just another ritual. I could be sitting in a Buddhist temple and going through their rituals and having the same benefit. So I'm still involved in those rituals, but it really is just that. It's ritual. But the interesting thing about it is, since I've changed that mindset, I think I get a lot more out of it now. Just looking for the symbolism and saying, oh, maybe there's something I can learn symbolically from this that I didn't used to think of as a true believing Mormon, but looking at it from the outside, saying, well, what is the value of this? And I've actually gotten more out of it just for myself, a lot more meaning that has nothing to do with perhaps what it was originally established to accomplish. But that's just one thought I had as you asked this question.
Wow, thank you. That meant a lot to me. Thank you very much. Anne.
I do miss ritual a lot. I miss the church's marking of important events in people's lives. I think that's a human impulse, and that everyone wants it. And when you leave a church and you leave your ritual, for me, it's been a void. I do have one ritual that I just do on my own. It's kind of a Catholic thing, I guess, but when someone in my family is ill or in the hospital, I light a candle for them and I leave it in the kitchen where it's safe, and I keep it on all day till I go to bed at night, because I get really busy during the day and I forget to think about that person who's not well. And so besides emailing them, we don't live near most of our relatives. It reminds me to think about that person. And then when they get better or come out of the hospital, I put the candle away. So it's just a small thing, and I probably picked it up from visiting cathedrals somewhere, I don't know, but I like to remember, I like to think about people when they're having a hard time and not just get carried away with all my busyness. So, but that's the only ritual I have at this point, and I think it's helpful if you find other people who participate in that ritual on a regular basis with you, because that's really would make it very important. And I can't really say my husband really knows why we have candles all the time on my table, because everybody's been so sick, but helps me anyway.
Thank you. I think that is important. I loved your illustration there, and I think it is important that it means something to us. That's the importance of a ritual. If we just do it and it has no sense to it, it's just going through the motions. So I appreciate that, Anne. Daniel.
Yeah, on creating rituals, Sean mentioned something that I think is really important to keep in mind, is to look at rituals that you've had or other rituals and then glean from that. So the ritual itself is the how, but take that all the way up to the why level. and figure out why this ritual, why this ritual. And then once you have the why and you've distilled it to the why, then you can apply it to a new ritual in your life, something new. You know the why of that. And that was actually one of the shortcomings that I found in this book, is I found that too often she stayed down at the how level. For instance, like the giving thanks to the harvest, and the harvesting. She just stayed down at the how level, like, you address the plant, all these steps. And then she didn't distill it all the way up to the why. She left it as, why don't you go out and try to do this? Like that we would go out and, when we would harvest, that we would talk to the plant and stuff. And I thought that was a shortcoming because, that's one way of doing it, but we should always distill it down to the why. And I think that's critical. So instead of us trying to copy other rituals and be like, oh, here's these steps they did, I'm going to do kind of similar steps and modify that. I think it's really important, as Sean was alluding to, distill it down to the why. Why do you do this? Why did that make me feel good? Why did I like that? And then you can create your own ritual that accomplishes the same thing, or that probably for you would maximize that benefit, the why, even more than the specific steps that somebody else has set out for you.
Thank you, Daniel. That's a very astute observation. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, she talked about restoring the land and healing. Her big example was Onondaga Lake, which at one time was the most polluted lake in the United States, and the efforts that have been put forward to restore that lake and how it looks so much better now. And I just want you to think to yourselves, because we're getting close to being out of time here. I don't want to go on for too long, and I have a couple more things I really want to talk about. Just think to yourself, what, if anything, do we owe to nature? Maybe you can put it in the chat. And I've thought about that a lot, and I do not have an answer yet. So I would certainly love to hear maybe in the chat what people think about what, if anything, do we owe to nature? And then let's go on to the next slide. Okay, she talks about the cautionary tale about the Wendigo. And the Wendigo is the legendary monster of her people. He's kind of the villain, and he comes during the winter, and he's always hungry. He cannot be satiated. He eats and he eats and he eats. And he's, kind of like a big abominable snowman type figure. He has sharp teeth and claws, and maybe you can think of it as a scary Halloween story, or maybe you can think of it as, just a ghost tale or something. But she talks about the Wendigo as it's not a wolf, it's not a bear, it's not a natural beast, but a Wendigo is a human being who has become a cannibal monster. It's more than just a mythic monster. It's the name for that which is inside of us that cares more for its own survival than for anything else. And it can never be satiated. So it's kind of the personification of greed. She talks about some aspects that we could relate to the Wendigo would be addictions, drug addiction or other addictions. She talks about companies that pollute just to make a dollar. So I want to talk about, how are we like the Wendigo? Do we have parts of ourselves that just cannot be satiated and that are doing harm to other people? And how can we defeat the Wendigo? And should we even try? Should we just follow our passions and our instincts, or should we try to defeat this Wendigo? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I say defeat the Wendigo.
Okay, yeah, I do too, personally. Why though?
You turn that back on Daniel.
Yeah.
That's the why.
Why, Daniel?
I mean, dude is ugly, man. Ugly and nasty.
Luann.
I think it's so complicated. I look at company greed and people who are doing hard things to the earth just for a huge profit. And I want to say no, but one argument that you receive from that side is what they do is for maintaining a large population, that the practices that we see as superior, such as not using fossil fuels, etc., were for smaller populations, and as the population grew, the land would not sustain a huge number. And so I don't know, I'm not willing to give up the use of a car. I'm not willing to not travel. I feel I try hard not to waste, and I recycle and try to use the land respectfully, but it's complicated. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
No, thank you, Luann. It is complicated. And I think there is a difference between kind of the global Wendigo and the personal Wendigo. And of course, you know, we can have much more effect in our personal lives than we can globally. But it is a complicated question. Katie.
So I've been hearing about the Great Salt Lake and how it's drying up and releasing arsenic into the air. And I only got about halfway through the book. And so I didn't get to the author's discussion of the Wendigo. So I wanted to ask those of you from Utah, is the Great Salt Lake a Wendigo in this case?
Okay, Daniel, do you have an answer to that, or were you just going to say something else?
I was going to say something else, but I mean,
Okay.
in answer to that, I would say, you know, the Great Salt Lake itself, you know, it very much could be a Wendigo, or you could look at it as the results of Wendigo behavior. You know, because the Wendigo takes and takes and takes, and that's what's happened to the Great Salt Lake, because people have taken all the water that would go into the Great Salt Lake. But I was just going to say that I actually, in the story of the Wendigo, I actually see some hope for humanity. And let me explain a little bit. So say, for instance, also the story that it talked about the first man and how the crane taught the first man to fish, and the first man went and overfished and fished all the fish out of the lake, and the fish were gone. And I listened to that story and the story of the Wendigo, and I think, where did these come from? Why did we have these stories? I don't believe that some mythical being gave these stories to us to teach us. I think these stories came about because people made mistakes. They screwed up. There were some people who fished all the fish out of the lake, and they were like, whoops, that was a mistake. And then these myths, these stories came about. There were people that overconsumed, and they made a mistake. And in this case, we're talking about the native peoples. They made mistakes. They screwed up. They ruined stuff. And then they're like, oh, crap, that was a mistake. We better stop doing that. And so we actually see that humans have this capacity to learn. Unfortunately, a lot of it is we don't know. We don't have all the information, and we screw up and we make mistakes, but we learn from it. And we're like, we better stop doing that. And we have a great capacity to learn from our mistakes and move forward. And so I think that's something, like I said, it's hopeful. As human beings, we're realizing now we screwed up, you know, with the Great Salt Lake. We fucked that up. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, with our environment, we've screwed stuff up, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can learn that we are going to come up with something. We're going to make new ways. You know, for the native peoples, it was, hey, don't take too much. Let this number go. Take the first. Take only male deer. Don't take female deer. they would learn ways, but then they would overcome because they first screwed up and then they learned not to do that. Well, we done screwed up and we're learning now how to fix that. And I think we will. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Daniel. That was beautifully said. I agree with you 100%. And I think that is the point of myth, is to teach us something. And I always thought of the myths that I had grown up with earlier as the absolute historical truth. And that's what caused me a lot of problems. I didn't understand that it was to teach a symbolic story, to teach a lesson. Okay, let's go to the very last slide. And here I just have put a few pictures of different things that she talked about in the book, maybe to spark any ideas that anyone has. What are your final take homes from this book? What were some of your favorite quotes? What are your final thoughts? I really, really enjoyed this book. I thought we could spend hours and hours on it. And I appreciate all the comments people have given, either vocally or in the chat. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts, anyone? Luann.
Final thought is thank you. You put a lot of work and thought into this, and I love the discussion. Good job.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Daniel.
Lynette, I just say, for me, the thing that I learned from the book is that the earth gives us so much, and if we give back equally and make sure that we take care of it, we can solve the problems that we've created, and we've got to do better. But there are ways, and it gave me hope. This to me was common sense ways of making changes, as opposed to just saying, don't do this because there's no way that everyone's going to stop driving a car. That's just not realistic. But if you look at it and take it all in and consider yourself in your position, I think we can make a change. That's what I learned from the book. And I just thought it was a beautifully written book with some ideas I had never considered, or a different way of looking at things that I'd never looked at before.
Thank you.
Well, I would just like to say how much I appreciated the presentation you put together. I have not finished the book yet, but about halfway through, and I absolutely love the book. I may be the only one who's doing the audiobook, but she actually reads it herself. And her voice is beautiful as her words that she's written. And I'd like to know, can we have copies of these slides? Because I have a hard time reading it all, but I would really love to get those. And I don't know if you can pass them on to me, but I thought the slides you had were great.
Okay, Melinda, can we post the slideshow somewhere?
Yeah, we can definitely make that happen.
That'd be great.
Thanks.
It's an excellent discussion. I mean, everybody who contributed, it's been great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Well, thank you, Lynette. Yep, everybody, hands for Lynette. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll figure out a way. We'll post the slides, or if you communicate it with us through email, we will email those out. And also our entire discussion is recorded, which I love, so we can revisit it, and those that don't have a chance to be here can also enjoy it. So
we also ought to mention that Lynette lost her mother this week, and she put this together and did this amidst all of that as well. So we really appreciate her efforts in this. Well done, Lynette.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. And we're so sorry for your loss of your mother. But thank you for coming here today and giving this discussion. So, all right, let's talk about what's next very quickly as we end here. So this month we have talked about the earth. Next month, we are talking about something otherworldly. And we are going to be reading Early Mormonism and the Magical World View. Now, this is a pretty long book, although half the book is footnotes. So we're kind of presenting this like it's going to be a sort of a presentation. You can read the book if you'd like. It's not on audio, but if you aren't able to read the book or finish the book, please still come. This is going to be on a special Sunday, October the 23rd at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And it's going to be a magical multimedia presentation. We have slides, we have props, we have costumes. This is going to be a really fun deep dive into the early magical world of the origin of the church. And this book is blowing our minds. There's a lot of things in it that you probably have never heard of before. This is going to be really fascinating. So hopefully everybody can come with the date change and wear a costume. We're going to. We want to make this just really fun and extremely user-friendly as we go through this information. And it's going to be a presentation with me and Landon and Melinda. We're each taking a section of the book and we're each going to put together our own little presentation and then combine them. So I think it's going to be really fun. So that is coming up for our book next month. Next slide, stay in contact with us. If you only connect with us through email and want to join our Facebook page, we have a lot of fun there. You can find us, the logo is what you see there. We're also on Instagram, sort of off and on TikTok. Anyway, we love to connect with you guys and hear from you and be able to get all the information out to you. So please connect as you can so we don't lose you. We value you. And if you do connect with us on email, we always, for some reason, go to spam. It comes from thegoodbookclub@mail.com. If for some reason they don't like us, it goes to spam. So check your spam, mark not spam, so we can always get in touch with you and let you know what's coming up. For those of you that are new, we love to talk to each other so much. And we also are trying to create our own 3-hour block that we stay on afterwards if you want, and we just kind of talk. We call it our own mix and mingle. So we will now officially end the meeting and we will just move over into mix and mingle. Tom and I are going to stay just for a couple minutes to say hi. And then since we're on vacation, we're going to take off and go to the Getty Villa here in California. So, but that was a wonderful